That's a direct violation, Marcus said, flicking the edge of the notice tacked to my cabin door like it offended him. Unapproved exterior modifications, and you've ignored multiple warnings. You'll need to vacate within 30 days. His smile was thin, professional, practiced like he'd rehearsed kicking people out of their homes. I stared at the paper, but not because I hadn't read it. I'd memorized it the moment it arrived. You know this weather vane? I nodded toward the eagle, perched on the roof, catching the morning light like it belonged there. It still pings back to my server, motion sensor embedded inside. Been running diagnostics on it every night since 2017. Marcus's eyes twitched. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. He stepped back a little, like he suddenly remembered I wasn't just a quiet old man in a quiet old cabin. Look, Daniel, he said, adjusting his collar, the board's made a decision. Your board doesn't outrank a recorded easement and an ADA-compliant certification, I said, voice steady. And I built this cabin with my father, every board nail in that vein, his hands and mine. I could have told him more, that the last conversation I had with my father was on that porch, that he'd been too sick to talk for days, but when the wind turned and the vein creaked, he whispered, "That's yours now. Don't let anyone take it." Instead, I just looked Marcus dead in the eyes. That wasn't a decoration up there, it was a promise. The sun cut through the trees, hitting the copper edges of the eagle like it was alive. The cabin wasn't just wood and siding, it was every Saturday morning with my dad, every scar on my forearm from hammer slips, every time he handed me a thermos and said, "Don't let this place go to strangers." And now some HOA bureaucrat who'd lived here all of 18 months wanted to find me into submission. Where are you watching from? I ask. Because this isn't just my fight, it's the fight of anyone who's ever been cornered by power-drunk boards with nothing better to do than bully people out of their homes. They don't see it yet, but Marcus and his cronies just picked the wrong guy to screw with. I stepped inside and closed the door, not slamming it, just letting it click, real quiet. Then I pulled up my feed archive and queued up something I'd saved for exactly this kind of moment. It was time to remind the HOA that audio-visual engineers make dangerous enemies. I didn't waste time. The moment the door closed, I connected to the archive drive on my secure NAS. Years of footage, voice logs, and time-stamped violations loaded like a deck of cards ready to be played. That weather vane wasn't the only thing I'd wired. But Marcus wasn't acting alone. He was the head of a system, and that system had been tightening its grip on High Pines Ridge for the last 2 years. I saw the first red flag last fall when Mrs. Engel's flagpole got flagged as unsightly. She'd flown that Colorado state flag for 30 years. A few weeks later, a young couple down the hill got a warning about the shape of their garden beds. Too non-conforming. And then Eli Martinez, my closest neighbor, was told to remove his hand-built wheelchair ramp. They claimed it violated the aesthetic guidelines. They made him rebuild it at an angle that was less visible from the street. He almost fell twice. I visited Eli that afternoon. His cabin overlooked the back ridge, completely private except for the occasional deer, and he always had the kind of quiet that made you feel like time slowed down there. This isn't about weather vanes, I told him. It's about control. Eli nodded slowly. I think Marcus wants to turn this place into some kind of investment portfolio. High turnover, uniform lots. Get rid of the long-timers who make it feel like a community. That theory snapped into place like it had always been waiting. Marcus had slipped in with charm. Young, charismatic, promised to modernize the HOA. What he did was recruit a board of hand-picked yes-men, and now they were bleeding old-timers out of the neighborhood one compliance notice at a time. He sent someone to look at my shed, Eli said, tapping his cane against the floor. Said it was too close to the tree line. My shed's been there since '96. We used to store firewood together in it, remember? I remembered. And I remembered how Eli was the one who pulled me out of a snowbank with his truck the winter my dad passed. He didn't ask for anything. Just showed up, like a neighbor should. They're testing who'll fight and who'll fold, I said. They need to know someone's watching. Later that night, I walked through the community center parking lot after dropping off a stack of photo prints, pictures of residents and their homes before the modernization. On the far side of the lot, I saw Lorraine Chen getting out of her car, clutching a folder to her chest. She paused when she saw me. Her eyes dipped down for a second too long. Lorraine had been the HOA secretary for 5 years, long before Marcus arrived. She used to run the newsletter, bring cookies to board meetings, and help neighbors apply for exception permits. But lately she'd been quiet, absent, distant. I didn't speak to her that night, but I saw the weight she carried in her shoulders as she walked inside. That's when I realized Marcus didn't just have control of the rules, he had people scared. He had them complicit. And he was counting on their silence. I went home and uploaded my backup surveillance clips to a secure server off-site. If this was going to turn public, and it would, I needed to make sure I had everything in place. Marcus had the HOA. But I had something better, evidence. And a digital audience that wouldn't blink twice at exposing it. The community didn't need another fight. It needed a win. Lorraine didn't used to flinch. I remembered her as the first to greet newcomers, the one who helped my dad fill out accessibility paperwork back when the stairs became too much for him. But now, every time I saw her, it looked like she was trying to disappear inside herself. The next time I ran into her, it wasn't in a meeting or on the sidewalk, it was in the tiny post office trailer that serviced High Pines Ridge. She stood in front of Box 41, flipping through envelopes with shaky fingers. Her HOA badge dangled from a lanyard around her neck, but she didn't carry it with pride. It looked like a leash. When she saw me behind her, she froze for half a second too long. Then she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Daniel," she said softly. "Lorraine," I nodded. "You doing okay?" She blinked, then clutched a thick white envelope closer to her chest. "I'm fine. Just a lot of board logistics this month." I didn't respond right away. I just let the silence hang, long enough for her to fill it with whatever was really pressing down on her. She glanced at the clerk, then back at me, eyes darting like she didn't trust any space anymore. "They're pushing a new streamlining bylaw," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus says it'll help with enforcement, but it means they don't need majority board approval for fines under $5,000. "That's illegal," I said flatly. She winced. "He says the lawyer signed off." "Which lawyer?" I asked. Her lips pressed together, then curled in frustration, not at me, but at herself. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked out, with her envelope hugged against her ribs, her movements stiff. From the side, I caught the tell. Her hand was trembling. She was scared. But she wasn't fully on their side. Not yet. That night, I sat on the back porch, coffee gone cold in my hand, staring out at the trees behind my cabin. The wind made the eagle vein creak softly overhead. Every gust was like a whisper. "Don't let them erase this." I thought about Lorraine's hands. The way she used to pass out meeting minutes like they were wedding invitations, tidy, precise, full of care. Now they shook. And I knew that meant something inside her was still fighting. The next morning, I showed up to the open comment HOA meeting. Not to speak, just to watch. Marcus stood at the head of the room, like a man who thought he was already mayor. The other board members nodded along to everything he said, their eyes glued to notes or phones. Lorraine sat off to the side, flipping through pages of typed reports, but never speaking. During the financial summary, Marcus casually mentioned a new line item: administrative response fees. No vote, no discussion. Just a line item that would let them slap a new cost on any homeowner who even asked a question. I watched Lorraine closely, her head lowered slightly, her fingers pressed so hard into her pen that the plastic bent. She knew. After the meeting, I caught up to her in the parking lot again. "You're the one who signs those reports," I said gently. "If you ever wanted to set the record straight, people would listen. I'd make sure of it." She didn't look at me, but she didn't walk away, either. Her silence was no longer loyalty. It was fear. And fear could turn. I didn't need her to flip overnight. I just needed her to remember who she was before Marcus made her afraid to be. I went home, knowing one thing. The HOA might control the rules, but Lorraine held the truth. And all I needed was one moment of courage to change everything. 2 days later, the escalation came. I was on the ladder checking the solar panel junction box when I heard a vehicle crunch up the gravel. I turned in time to see a white SUV with the HOA logo on the door pull into my drive, Marcus in the passenger seat, and a clipboard-wielding guy I didn't recognize behind the wheel. They didn't wave, just parked like they owned the dirt under their tires. I climbed down slowly, wiping my hands on a rag I kept clipped to my belt. Marcus stepped out first, smug as ever. "This is Mr. Howard," he said, gesturing toward the other man. "Our new compliance officer." Compliance officer? That was new. He's conducting a full site inspection, Marcus added, like he was announcing a public service. Howard stepped forward with zero expression, flipped a page, and began reading aloud. Unapproved electronic installations, non-conforming external structure, possible obstruction of emergency services access, failure to remediate per prior notice, violation of revised code 7.2. He looked up. You have 10 days. I felt my teeth clench. That solar panel was approved in 2018 by board vote. I've got the time-stamped footage of the installation meeting. It's outdated approval, Marcus said smoothly. And under the new resolution, all external hardware must be resubmitted for conformity review. I didn't reply. Just let the wind speak for me, the gentle squeak of the weather vane turning overhead. This wasn't about panels or weather vanes. It was about force. Howard snapped a picture of the sidewall with his phone and walked off without a word. Marcus lingered. Honestly, Daniel, he said, lowering his voice just enough to pretend this was empathy. It'd be easier on you if you just let the board help you relocate. I didn't move. He glanced up at the vane, then back at me. Sentiment can't override structure. Structure without memory is just concrete, I replied. He blinked. I could see he didn't understand it. Or maybe he did, and it bothered him. He left without another word. I watched their SUV wind back down the gravel path and vanish around the pine line. The air felt heavier afterward. I went inside and immediately logged the time, the photos, and the audio I'd captured through my smart cam. Everything went into the archive. Double backed up. Then, I pulled out the HOA's new public records from their website. Buried in a PDF appendix page 47, in 6-point font, was the clause Marcus had just used. Resolution 7.2. Pushed through in a closed session, not a community vote. It was pure bait. A weaponized code revision designed to push people out. That's when I knew the 10-day notice wasn't a warning. It was a trap. I grabbed my keys and headed into town. There was someone I needed to talk to, not a lawyer, not a neighbor, a journalist. Not from a major paper, just a local independent reporter named Naomi, who covered county board meetings and city zoning politics. She had a column called The Boundary Lines, where she dug into overreach cases and misuse of municipal authority. I'd read her stuff for years, never thought I'd be one of her stories. I found her in her favorite coffee shop, hammering away at a laptop. I introduced myself and gave her the broad strokes. She listened closely, didn't interrupt, and took notes the old-fashioned way, with a pen and a notebook. When I told her I had footage of a board president intimidating a disabled veteran over a shed and recordings of a closed-door policy rewrite targeting legacy properties, her eyebrow arched. That's not HOA oversight, she said. That's a hostile conversion strategy. She asked for time to look into the property turnover numbers and the legality of the enforcement resolutions. We exchanged info. She didn't promise a headline, but she didn't need to. When I got home that night, I updated the server logs, added Naomi to the secure file share folder, and sat on the porch until dusk. The vane creaked above me, as steady as ever. Marcus thought he gave me 10 days. He gave me a countdown to detonation. 2 days into the 10-day notice, I woke up to a ping on my secure server. Naomi had sent over something, just a subject line. You'll want to see this. No body text, just 2 attachments. The first was a photo, a smiling Marcus shaking hands with a suited man outside a real estate developer's office. The second was a zoning board approval certificate filed less than a week ago, requesting permits to subdivide 4 large properties on the eastern ridge of High Pines. One of them sat right next to mine. That was it. The push to remove me wasn't about a weather vane. It was about proximity to profit. I checked the approval dates Marcus had filed on behalf of the HOA without disclosing the internal votes to residents. Worse, the certificate included a line stating that current enforcement activities are underway to ensure compliance across all parcels slated for rezoning. They were using violations as a purge, but it wasn't Naomi's attachments that cracked the case open. It was what she said on the phone an hour later. I ran a search on the consultant Marcus listed on the certificate, she said. It's a shell, no website, no actual tax filing in the county records. Just an email and a disconnected phone line. And, I asked, already bracing for the rest. That same consultant is named in 2 HOA cases from other counties. Both involved rapid turnover, aggressive enforcement, and property flips. Both communities were gutted within a year. The pattern was the same, and I knew how to prove it, not with documents, with recordings. I spent the rest of that day reviewing flagged files from my cabin's entry camera and directional mic. They'd been filtered, time-stamped, archived automatically, but one clip stood out. Audio only, captured from just inside the boundary line, 2 nights before my inspection. I don't care if he installed it with his dad. If he doesn't move, we'll fine him out. Marcus's voice. No hesitation. Then, a pause. A second voice, Lorraine's barely above a whisper. That's not what the community agreed to. You're going too far. Marcus again, cold as steel. This isn't about the community. It's about future value. That clip hit like a hammer. It wasn't just evidence, it was intent. Intent to financially displace residents using power they didn't have. I didn't wait. I clipped the audio and isolated the waveform to reduce ambient noise. Cleaned it up with my editing software, overlaid it with a still photo of the cabin, and embedded a timestamp. Then, I backed it up 3 times. I sent Naomi a preview. Her response came quick. This just went from civil to criminal exposure. That night, I drove to Eli's and played the clip for him. He sat still the whole time, arms crossed over his chest, jaw tight. You think this'll hold up? It doesn't have to, I said. It just has to play loud in a courtroom, or a town hall, or a headline. We looked out across the ridge together. You could just make out my cabin's roof through the pine branches. The weather vane still spun, a constant reminder of everything they were trying to erase. I knew what was coming next. Marcus would try to accelerate the violation process. He'd double down. But now I wasn't just some guy with a cabin. I was a witness, a record keeper, a threat. And if they wanted to find me out of existence, they'd have to do it in front of an audience. By day 5 of the 10-day notice, I knew the window for playing defense was over. I wasn't waiting for another bogus inspection, or for some board-approved lackey to slap a fine on my door. Marcus had escalated this into a legal siege, and I was done giving ground. I took the next step not because I was ready, but because I was cornered. The turning point came that morning at the hardware store in town. I was picking up a new weatherproof enclosure for my uplink camera when I overheard 2 men near the register, talking about High Pines Ridge. Got a call to estimate 4 new pads out there, one of them said. Client said the land's already in prep, just needs the old folks out. Old folks? Like we were weeds in the soil. That was it. The urgency snapped into place. This wasn't theory anymore. They were moving, fast. I paid cash and left without another word. Back at the cabin, I started building my response not in court filings or angry letters, but in layered exposure. Media, witness, and community pressure, all aligned like a chain of falling dominoes. I set up the outdoor projector rig on the backside of my porch, out of view from the road. Not for the HOA, yet this was just prep. A test run. My goal was simple. Take what I knew and make it impossible to ignore. The footage I queued up first wasn't Marcus threatening Lorraine. It was a time-lapse of Eli's ramp being rebuilt, forced into an angle that put him at risk every single day. It faded into Mrs. Engel folding up her flag for the last time. Then audio. The clip of Marcus admitting this wasn't about community, but future value. I watched it all loop from a folding chair in the dark, the pine trees behind me like silent witnesses. This wasn't for show, it was for focus. Discovery method. Watching that compilation hit differently when it played on my own cabin wall. When the voices echoed off the porch we built by hand. When the eagle-shaped vane creaked slowly above it like it approved. That was the night I stopped reacting and started planning. I drafted a secure list of supporters, people I knew still cared about this place. Eli, obviously. Lisa, my sister, even if she lived out of state. Naomi, who was still digging deeper. And Lorraine. Though she hadn't crossed the line yet, I had a feeling her silence was splintering. I also added someone new, Deputy Raines. He wasn't HOA, he wasn't a lawyer. But he'd lived in this county for 20 years, and he'd been called out to High Pines enough to know something was off. I didn't need him to intervene just to see it for himself. I invited him to a test screening at my place in 3 days. No details. Just, you'll want to see this. He responded with a thumbs up. That meant it was time to finalize the setup. Cameras, projection angle, backup, feeds, everything calibrated to be shown in multiple formats, online, live, or even streamed on short notice. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was turning it into a story no one could look away from. The wind picked up as I secured the rig to the porch beams. That familiar creak of the vane turned overhead. I looked up at it, and for the first time in days, I didn't just feel pressure, I felt clarity. They wanted me to cave in 10 days? I had 4 left, and that was all I needed. Lorraine showed up unannounced. It was the 8th day the deadline was closing in, and I was finalizing the voice-isolated cut of Marcus's threat when I heard soft, quick knocks on the cabin door. Not the kind Marcus would use. These were cautious, hesitant. When I opened the door, she stood on the porch with a hood up, clutching a grocery bag like it gave her cover. Her eyes darted past me to the side yard, making sure no one else was around. "I didn't come to stay," she said quietly. I have something." She stepped inside and handed me the bag. Inside was a flash drive, taped inside an old cereal box. "I couldn't email it," she said. "The HOA server logs IP access. They'd know it came from me." I didn't ask what was on it. I just nodded and guided her to the side bench by the fireplace. She sat, but everything about her posture was tight, like someone ready to run. "What changed?" I asked. She swallowed. "It's been changing. You just didn't see me breaking." I sat across from her and waited. She looked at the ceiling like it might give her courage. "Marcus has a standing deal with a people as Haffant, development group Dunwell Capital. The zoning applications you mentioned? I was told they were hypothetical, but 2 days ago, I overheard him on the phone scheduling demolition crews. He's planning to wipe out this section of the ridge." My stomach sank. "They're trying to clear out 8 homes, not just yours, Eli's, Carol's. That artist guy with the little greenhouse? Gone." "Lorraine," I said, and this time the words stuck, because even after everything, I knew how hard this was for her. She looked down at her hands. "There's a full audio recording on that drive. Board meetings. Some one-on-ones. I didn't know I still had them, but I did. And you'll want to hear the one from April." "Why April?" Her lips tightened. That was when Marcus said the quiet part out loud. That he wouldn't stop until the ridge was stripped clean. I loaded the flash drive into my secure laptop, ran a check for spyware, then scanned the audio index. She wasn't exaggerating. There were board recordings, metadata matched with timestamps, and most importantly, Marcus's voice authorizing actions that required a resident vote he never held. I turned back to Lorraine. "You understand what happens if I use this?" She nodded. "I've already resigned. My letter's timestamped, effective tonight. But I want people to know I tried to stop it." "You did," I said. She started to cry, but not loudly. Just a slow leak, like pressure finally releasing after months of holding it in. I walked her to the porch, gave her a burner USB just in case, and told her to call me from payphones or VPNs until this blew over. Before she left, she turned and said, "He's scared of you now, you know." "Is he?" I asked. She nodded. "Because you don't fold." After she left, I plugged in the flash drive and started syncing clips to my projector feed. The final compilation would run 24 minutes. It would include the secret board, meetings, Marcus's recorded statements, the zoning applications, and most damning of all his plan to strip the ridge clean. This wouldn't be a courtroom submission, it would be a broadcast. In 2 days, they were holding a special compliance hearing. I'd be ready. The next morning, I got up before the sun and started calibrating the system. I wasn't preparing for a meeting, I was designing a battlefield. I'd converted the projector rig to a mobile unit anchored to a rolling tripod with a lithium battery pack I used for off-grid setups. I added a compact soundbar, a wireless uplink router, and a fail-safe USB clone wired directly into the core. Redundant, encrypted, shielded. If they cut the feed, I'd flip to backup. If they tried to shout me down, I'd let Marcus's voice speak over them. The meeting was scheduled for the next evening in the community rec hall, neutral ground that Marcus had picked for show. Big windows, neutral chairs, no dais. He thought that would make it look civil. I was going to make it unforgettable. I drove into town that day with my rig covered in a tarp in the truck bed and stopped by Naomi's office above the consignment store. She was already in reporter mode, dark blazer, audio recorder clipped to her collar, sleeves rolled up. "You good with front row center?" I asked. "I've got a GoPro on a chest mount," she replied. "I'm more than good." She handed me a folder. Inside were community complaints she'd pulled from HOA records under a public request. The trend was unmistakable. Marcus had doubled enforcement on legacy residents, and fines had tripled in 12 months. Residents under 45? Fined only once? Seniors? Some fined 5, 6 times. The pattern wasn't subtle anymore. It was a business model. This goes live tomorrow, she said. Even if you don't hit play. I will, I said. That afternoon, I walked the ridge one more time. Eli's ramp had fresh scrape marks from his chair wheels. The artist's greenhouse had a red sticker slapped on the side, pending demolition, and Carol's porch was stacked with boxes she'd finally caved. I took photos of each, not to archive, just to remind myself who this fight was for. Back at my cabin, I reviewed the full run of the footage again. Lorraine's voice, Marcus's threats, zoning docs, and finally the voiceover. I added one line: "You don't protect a home with silence. You protect it by telling the truth louder than they lie." That would be the first line they'd hear when the projector turned on. I tested the equipment, then tested it again. Screen washed clean, audio clear, mounted mic ready, live stream toggled off, waiting for the flip. Everything was silent but the weather vane. I watched it spin slowly in the evening light. 8 days ago, Marcus gave me 10 days to tear down my father's dream. Now, he had 48 hours until I tore down his. By the time the sun dipped below the ridge on day 10, I was already parked outside the community rec hall. I sat in the truck for a minute, watching people file in through the glass doors, neighbors, board members, a few of the new transplants who didn't know what the HOA used to stand for. Then I saw Eli roll up the ramp beside the building with a grim set to his jaw. Behind him came Naomi, camera bag slung over one shoulder and a quiet fire in her eyes. I opened the tailgate and pulled the tarp off the projector rig. It was time. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of floor polish and old pine wood. Metal chairs scraped across the tile as the crowd settled. At the front stood Marcus, flanked by 2 board members and a new HOA sign draped across the folding table. Official, self-important, perfectly arranged. He scanned the room and saw me. For the first time since this began, he didn't smirk. I rolled the rig into position along the side wall. No one questioned it. Most assumed I was there to document, not to detonate. Then Lorraine walked in. No badge, no folder. Just a clean blouse and a manila envelope clutched tightly in both hands. She didn't speak to Marcus. She didn't even look at him. She sat beside Eli. The energy in the room shifted. Marcus tapped his mic and cleared his throat. "Thank you for attending this expedited compliance review. Tonight's session is to address unresolved violations and determine potential enforcement pathways, particularly related to structural nonconformity at Parcel 17. Parcel 17, my home, my history." He couldn't even say my name. Before he could finish his opening statement, I wheeled the projector forward and clicked the latch. The screen snapped open with a clean hiss of fabric. A few people turned, curious. Lorraine froze. Marcus paused. "I'd like to offer a visual response," I said. Calm, steady. Already clicking the remote, he raised a hand. "That's not," I hit play. The screen lit up with the title card, High Pines Ridge, What You're Not Being Told. Then came the visuals footage of Marcus's SUV pulling into my drive, the forced inspection, the unapproved notices. Then, Mrs. Engel folding her flag, Eli's altered ramp, Carol's moving boxes. The room went silent. Then Lorraine's voice came over the speakers. "I don't think this is what the community agreed to." Then, Marcus, "This isn't about the community. It's about future value." The reaction was immediate gasps, whispers, the scrape of someone standing too fast. One woman near the back covered her mouth. Marcus tried to speak again. I turned the volume up. Next came the zoning docs, highlighted and time-stamped. The shell company Naomi had traced. The development map. 8 homes marked in red. Then came the April recording. Marcus, speaking confidently, "I won't stop until the ridge is stripped clean." I paused the playback at that moment, froze the screen on his face, captured mid-sentence. Silence stretched across the room like a wire about to snap. Marcus stepped forward, flushed. "This footage is taken out of context. It's an illegal recording." Naomi raised her voice. "I'm a licensed reporter. Everything you see here has been verified through multiple sources, including HOA records obtained through public access laws." A voice from the back called out, "Is it true? Are you trying to demolish our homes?" Then another, "You said we voted on this." The room erupted. Marcus held up his hands, but he was drowning in the noise. I powered down the projector and slowly packed it away. It had done its job. Tomorrow would be for paperwork, lawyers, and press. Tonight was for truth. I arrived an hour early. The rec hall sat quiet under a bruised sunset, but that silence was loaded. Inside, chairs were being set, name placards were placed on folding tables, and Marcus's voice echoed faintly as he rehearsed his opening statement with his inner circle. I watched through the side window, calm, focused. I wasn't here to argue anymore. I was here to execute. I wheeled in the rig from the truck, same as last time, but this time, the projector wasn't the only thing prepped. A short-throw backup unit was mounted on the ceiling beam I'd helped install last summer, still connected to the rec hall's own system, just in case. Multiple redundancies. Lorraine arrived 5 minutes later. She looked different, centered. She walked up without hesitation, shook my hand, and handed me the final piece, a notarized copy of her resignation and an internal HOA memo she'd slipped from Marcus's desk 2 weeks ago. It included projected profits from the sale of redeveloped lots, 8 homes, $4 million in projected revenue. None of it had ever been disclosed to residents. "I'll be sitting front row," she said. "I want him to see me, watch him fall." By the time the meeting opened, the room was full residents, a few local officials, and even 2 reporters I didn't recognize. Naomi sat dead center, camera mounted and rolling. Marcus stepped up to the mic and tapped it twice. "Good evening, neighbors. I'd like to begin tonight's compliance hearing by thanking you for your engagement." I rolled the rig to the side wall. He glanced at it, smirked. "You again?" he said, trying to play it light. "I suppose we should just give you your own agenda item at this point." I looked him in the eye. "You don't need to give it to me. I already have the floor." And then I hit the switch. The lights dimmed as the screen lit up. The opening frame, Lorraine's resignation letter. Dated, signed, time-stamped. Then, a financial document with Marcus's signature and projected developer ROI. Murmurs started before the audio even played. "I don't care if he installed it with his dad. If he doesn't move, we'll fine him out." I watched Marcus's body stiffen as the room grew still. Clip after clip played. The April recording. The zoning map. Marcus's line, "I won't stop until the ridge is stripped clean." I paused the footage, with Marcus's face frozen mid-word. "I have copies of this footage," I said. "Every major outlet, the county clerk's office, and 3 state representatives have already received them. But I thought our neighbors should be the first to see what's really been happening." I turned the mic toward the audience. "You want to find me? Strip my roof? Demolish the memory of the man who built this place with his bare hands?" I looked at the board. "Then do it, in front of everyone." Marcus didn't speak. Not yet. But his hands had started to tremble. Marcus tried to speak, but the room beat him to it. A woman in the 3rd row stood up. "Is this true? You've been working with developers behind our backs?" Another voice, "You said we approved those zoning shifts. No one I know ever voted on it." The tension snapped like a wire in a storm. Lorraine stood up. "It's all true," she said, voice level. "I was secretary. I watched it happen, and I was too afraid to stop it. But I'm not afraid anymore." Gasps. Someone in the back clapped, then more joined. Marcus raised his hands like he was conducting damage control. "You're being misled. These clips," Naomi cut him off. "I have the raw footage, GPS metadata, and your own internal HOA correspondence," she said, standing. "Do you deny signing off on this?" This is being twisted," Marcus said, his face red, his posture unraveling. But the room wasn't listening anymore. This wasn't his meeting anymore. Deputy Raines stepped forward from the back, one hand resting near his duty belt. "We've received formal complaints," he said, calmly, "and I've just been handed evidence suggesting zoning fraud and non-disclosure. Mr. Hale, I'd advise you to stop speaking." Marcus went quiet. The crowd, however, did not. Carol, who hadn't spoken in a meeting in over a year, stood up and demanded an emergency vote to suspend the current board. Eli wheeled forward and seconded it. I sat back and watched as the room turned on Marcus, not with rage, but with resolve. They voted, right there in the hall. It was unanimous. Marcus stepped away from the table, jaw clenched, and walked out without a word. Naomi's camera stayed locked on him the whole way. Lorraine stepped forward, took the mic, and said, "Effective immediately, I accept the community's nomination to serve as interim chair until proper elections can be held. Cheers." And then silence as she turned to me. "I think Daniel should be our community ethics liaison." I shook my head slowly. I didn't do this to join a committee, she smiled. Exactly why you should. The crowd laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was grateful. Outside, the wind picked up again. As I packed the projector into the truck bed, Eli came over and looked up at the sky. You know what I think? He said. I think your dad would have loved that you used a weather vane to take down a storm. If that's not justice, I don't know what island. The day after the meeting, the rec hall was quiet, but the neighborhood was anything but. By mid-morning, Naomi's article was already making rounds online. Hostile takeover in the Pines? How one man exposed a HOA power grab. It hit local forums first, then spread to regional outlets. Screenshots of Marcus's quotes, clipped audio, and side-by-side comparisons of zoning plans started popping up everywhere. But the real impact came from inside the Ridge. 3 longtime residents who had never spoken at HOA meetings stood up and demanded a vote to suspend board authority. Carol, who'd nearly left, was suddenly leading the charge. Eli filed an emergency motion, his first public action in years. And Lorraine? She submitted a formal affidavit to the county zoning office, documenting everything she'd witnessed. Her resignation letter was time-stamped, sealed, and accompanied by a copy of the same audio I'd played for the community. By noon, a cease order had been placed on all demolition-related activity. And Marcus Hale? Gone. No one had seen him since the night before. His SUV was missing. His email bounced. The board posted a generic leadership transition notice, but the damage had been done. His name was tied to every headline now, every audio file circulating the community forums. But for me, it wasn't over. I sat on the porch that evening, same spot where my father used to drink his coffee, legs stretched out, hands behind his head, watching the trees like they'd tell him something new if he stared long enough. Above me, the weather vane turned, with the wind unbothered, unbroken, still spinning true. I looked around, same creak of the wood, same scent of pine sap in the air. But something had shifted. People had seen, people had spoken. I hadn't just saved my cabin. I'd reminded this place what it was built on, not rules, but roots, not structure, but memory. And that memory had outlasted Marcus Hale. The board would be restructured next month. An interim leadership vote had already been called, with Lorraine listed as acting chair until elections could be held. I sent her a message. Thank you. He never saw you coming, she replied. He never saw any of us coming. That's what made him lose. Eli stopped by later that night, pulled his truck right up to the porch. Just wanted to see the eagle one more time, he said, grinning. Before they try to trademark that too. I laughed, real, open laughter, for the first time in weeks. Let him try. He looked up at it for a moment. Your dad would have loved what you did. I didn't do it for him, I said. I did it because of him. We sat there until dusk, talking about everything and nothing, while the weather shifted and the vane kept turning above us. No red tags, no fines, no more silence. Just wind, wood, and legacy. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.